Welcome to the Employment Module, Personal Appraisal, Understanding Your Strengths and Weaknesses. This is a CalTAP sponsored module presented by Swords to Plowshares. This is an important first step if you've recently left service, or if you're looking back to go pursue a different career field or anything, is talking about personal appraisal and kind of having that self-reflection. Now, when we think about it, if you're creating a resume, if you're trying to get into a particular field, you're already doing personal appraisal. You're trying to analyze, okay, what were skills that I learned? What are different talents that I've learned? And we really need to kind of codify that and really get into the details on what you should be reflecting on and how can you use that in order to communicate that to potential employers. We're going to do this by reflecting on your military experience, reflecting on career choice and career research. So your military experience, we want to talk about identifying skills and values that are transferable to a variety of jobs. If you're coming out of the military and, let's say you joined young, maybe the military occupational specialty that you went in for isn't something that you have an interest in any longer. If you do, congratulations. It might make your civilian professional path a lot easier, especially, let's say, if you were once military police and now you're going into law enforcement. That can be a lot more straightforward than other things. But if you're not, it can be a bit difficult at times, because here you are having spent, 2, 4, 6, 8, any amount of years in the military with a bunch of skill sets and trying to find a way to be able to make that transferable to whatever else you're looking for in the civilian world. So we got to identify those skills and values that are transferable to a variety of jobs. We got to keep those skills and values as a transferable skills inventory. By doing that, we can develop in a way of what translates to multiple jobs. We can think of that in terms of soft skills and leadership and teamwork and adaptability and discipline. An issue with that, though, is we can talk about the leadership, we can talk about your different experiences within the military, we can talk about your adaptability, we can talk about your discipline, yet the culture, the military culture that we were in and how we were taught to understand and present that stuff, especially if, we were seeking promotions or trying to articulate what we were doing, is a lot of it is loaded with military jargon or military specific terms, or maybe terms that are a lot more used within the military, not necessarily seen in the civilian counterpart. And so we have to be able to translate that to the benefit of ourselves. Here's a list that CalVet kind of provided to give an idea of trying to measuring your skills and understanding your ratings. So here's a basic thing that you could just take and reflect on. We do have this attached to a separate module, so if you wanted to take this onto a Word document, for example, and actually go through and write it down or print it out and write it in, that's something that you can do. So if we're looking at 1, very competent, 2, moderately competent, 3, somewhat competent, 4, not competent, this is something that you can quickly go down to the list. If we think adapt to change, the vast majority of us who've served, we can say that we're at the very least moderately competent. When it comes to certain things such as install software, plumbing, electrical systems, that would be a 4 for me. That's not something that I have an understanding of whatsoever, but that might have been really relevant to your military occupational specialty. And so this can give you a better spectrum, an idea of, okay, these are my skill sets. These are the different things that I can fall in. So you can develop as a foundation to move on from. Now, there's this method called the STAR method. What's great about this is we can take what we know to be a specific military experience or things that you've done in the military, but function in a way that we can translate it onto resumes or into the civilian world for civilian consumption. Because there's certain things that we might say that could be impressive to one another or that we could understand to one another, but an employer might look at it and be like, I don't know what you're trying to articulate with this, or I don't know what the importance of this is. I don't know how this is necessarily relevant. And it can make life more difficult for you seeking employment. Starting off with S, or situation, talking about the context you are operating in, challenges or opportunities faced. Now, keep in mind, we're saying this might sound abstract to you. We're going to have follow-up examples of this to further explain it. T for task, mission, objective, project, or idea you were trying to act on. A for action, steps or approach used to complete task. Results, the before and after changes you created. So here's an example. If we're talking about your ability to train other people as a team leader, now this is something that you could use to even articulate in cover letters, you could use to articulate in resumes, or something that you could bring up during the process of an interview as well. So, situation. Your unit received new portable generators. The task that you were assigned was that you were tasked with ensuring team members were able to follow the new maintenance procedures. So the action that you had to conduct was conducting hands-on training for each of this crew. What was the result of that? The team members that were part of it achieved a 95% pass rate on proficiency tests and 100% on the retest. You could even elaborate that further. You talk about, I trained 20 people in order to be able to do this and accomplish this or set this out. And so it's important to show numbers when you're talking about this kind of stuff. It's important for people to understand the impact and the spectrum. And so this might seem small, but it can get a point across of, hey, if I have to train a group of people to accomplish a certain task, that's something that I've already done and I've done with a degree of success. Here's an example star statement. After my unit was issued a new model of portable generators, I was given the mission of ensuring team members were able to maintain them. I trained team members on maintenance procedures. They achieved a 95% pass rate on the first proficiency test and 100% on the retest. Now, if you were to convert that, let's say, into a bullet point for a resume, something that you accomplished was you designed and delivered generator technical training, resulting in 100% mastery of skills by trainees. Again, something that might make that sound better is being able to name a number of trainees if you train a decent amount of people. When my unit was alerted for an overseas deployment, I was tasked with developing a load plan for all unit equipment. After intensive coordination over a 2-month period with airlift and sea lift staff, I developed a plan that enabled all of our equipment to arrive on schedule in operational condition. Now, some employers might get an understanding of that. Some of it might throw them off. Let's talk about that being converted into a bullet point. Short, simple, and sweet. Develop plans to ensure timely and damage-free transportation of equipment by air and sea. Now, there's ways to make that more impressive. You could talk about the amount of equipment, the importance of the equipment, or the significance of that equipment. Here's another star statement example. Example, tasked with devising a solution to rising costs and errors that were negatively impacting our clients. I introduced a quality control program that enabled us to generate $10,000 in savings and reduced errors by 50%. Now, this is more civilian, but it can give you an idea of a good kind of parallel comparison. Converting that into a bullet point, implemented quality control program that generated $10,000 in savings with a 50% reduction in errors. Short, simple, sweet, and it looks impressive. Another issue that you may come across when trying to explain what you did in the military is, especially when we talk about the amount of acronyms that are within the military, is how can you convert that onto a resume, or how can you convert that while talking into an interview? Some options for this are, for example, let's say you were an NCO. Put in parentheses, you were team leader, you were supervisor, manager, or coordinator. If you're talking about your military occupational specialty, a lot of civilians don't know what MOS means. You say MOS, they're going to be like, what? Just refer to it as your career field or what your career was while you were in the military. Same thing with commanded. That's not necessarily terms that you're going to see in the civilian world. You're going to see supervised and directed. It's not just important when we talk about employers becoming veteran friendly and getting a better understanding of us and our culture, but we have to make the genuine effort to try and translate exactly what we've done and who we are to make ourselves more appealing to get hired in the civilian workforce. All right, from there, let's go into career choice. Now, when thinking about your career, that might not be the first thing you're thinking about when you get out of the military. You could definitely be thinking about everything else except for work. And then for some people, that's what you're thinking of before you even get out. That's going to be a concern, a worry. Maybe you have family, you have kids, you have a partner that you need to take care of. You need to be in a financially feasible place before you even leave the military. So when you're thinking about career choices, you are wanting to think, what are your work preferences and what are your work values, and why these things are important. The reason these things are important, and we can see this, and it's not necessarily something that people want to admit to employers, or a statistic that employers want to kind of like see because it doesn't look good, but when you're recently separated from service, your first job is probably going to be something that you're not at within the next year. A lot of veterans feel like they lose some worth when they work in the civilian world, or they don't feel like they have the same amount of meaning or the same kind of passion that they do for their work. There's a whole host of reasons why veterans don't necessarily stay at their first job they get post-separation. And that also coincides with when we talk about, what are your work values? A lot of people think of a job as kind of a means to an end, and that's understandable. It makes it a lot easier, though, if you are working at a job that you can really get into, where it's something that maybe you can enjoy. You can enjoy the values of whoever you're working with or working for. Maybe working for a big corporation is something that you enjoy doing. Maybe it's something that the moment you got through the door, you're like, I actually don't like being in this kind of situation. I want to work in a smaller, more intimate environment. Or maybe you thought that you were comfortable with some kind of like high speed, fast environment, and you're like, hey, actually, this isn't something I want to do for the rest of my life. Or on the inverse, maybe you got into like a really slow career field where, the pace can drag on day to day, and that's not something you're necessarily excited about either. It's important to self-analyze and critique yourself, and especially because, there's a lot of service members who maybe didn't have multiple jobs before getting into it, or their one experience prior to working in the military was retail. And there's a ton of different career fields out there. There's a ton of different jobs out there, and they all look different. And how you can respond and thrive in those environments is all really different. And unfortunately, it's not like we could just go job hopping from one to another, trying them on like clothes in order to find out where we fit. And so it's more important for us to kind of self-reflect and self-critique about our own experiences, especially in the military. What did I like about being in the military? What did I not like about being in the military? What would I like to see in my civilian workplace that might transition over where I'd be like, hey, this is a part of the military that I especially enjoyed, like working in a workplace where, my coworkers are people that I can develop camaraderie with, rather than just people who I'm going to ignore and stay in my cubicle the whole time. That segues over into talking about career research. So this is where, taking about that broader, what are your values? What are you into? These are specific questions that you want to ask yourself. What do you enjoy working with? Do you enjoy working with data? Do you enjoy working with people? Objects. There are some people who are super hands-on and super technical, and they can work crafting every single day, and that's something they can be absolutely content with. These are different things that we kind of have to understand about ourselves. And if there's a big problem when it comes to finding a degree or finding a career, it's understanding ourselves and what we want to do for a significant chunk of our lives. Where do you prefer working? Outdoors, indoors, a mix? There's some people where all of a sudden they've been working indoors 40 hours a week, having come in from the military, and they realize, a 9 to 5 in a cubicle is not something I can do. Or there's some people who now might find themselves working in a more outdoors job where they're like, this is kind of a strain on my body. I've already had a pretty physically demanding job for years. I don't know if this is something that I necessarily want to keep up, and maybe I need to dial down physically what I do. Location is important too. You could go back to the small town that you may have initially come from and realize that's not your thing, or the same thing when it comes to a large city. People don't necessarily understand, but location matters a lot. Even though I enjoy the city, I'm also an outdoors person, so it's more of, hey, I know my personal location, I need to be in a proximity of both, where I can access both whenever I kind of feel like it. And that's not necessarily a benefit everybody can have or a preference everybody has. For me personally, I know that's where it's best for me. And if I can work in a career situation that allows me to do that, I'm going to be a happier person. It's also important when we talk about the size of a company. If you're working for a giant company where there's tons of people, you might tend to go unnoticed. You might just feel kind of like a faceless mass, and maybe that's something you're comfortable with. Maybe that's something you're fine. You just want to get through the workday, get done, get back home. No big deal. Sometimes, though, when you're working in smaller companies and it's a lot more personal and you know leadership, you know other people, you're able to create these bonds and work in a different, unique way, or your importance can be recognized differently, or you can be validated differently. That can also be really important for some people. Self-employment can also be a huge thing for some people, where they just really want to be working on their terms in their own operations. These are things you also have to analyze for yourself, and sometimes the only way you can know is by experiencing it. Maybe you didn't necessarily like being in the military setting and having to live with a lot amount of people there, but maybe working in a big civilian company is different and works out for you. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but travel's normative for some career fields. And it can be really fun. It can be really exciting, especially when you're younger. And if you don't necessarily have a family or obligations, it's a great way to find other ways to experience the world, to be able to kind of enjoy that travel lifestyle. If there's a lot of it, though, that can be exhausting. Some of it can be great, but let's say you're swamped. You've got a family that you've got to take care of on top of like all this other work, and traveling to be away from them might be an undue burden on your family. That might not be something that you'd be interested in. Really reflect too, which of your past jobs did you like the least? Was the military your only experience in jobs? How did you feel about that? How did you feel about different elements of that? Did you work a few jobs for the military? I knew when I got back out of the service, before that I had worked retail, and that was the last thing I wanted to go back into. I wanted to avoid retail as much as I possibly could, and that was for a lot of reasons. And I knew those reasons and why I wanted to completely steer clear of that. But it's important to be able to articulate why. So if you're seeing that in another career field, or if you're seeing that in another professional environment, that could be potentially a red flag for you, where you're like, you know what, this is something that's actually a common trend in some places. I'm not comfortable with it. I'm not cool with working here. It's also important to think about, what did you like best? A lot of people, when they separate from the military, one of the bigger issues we find about when they talk about being in a civilian employer is they don't feel like they're being used to the best of their ability, or they don't necessarily feel like they're being valued, or that they're a part of something bigger or better. There's like a loss of importance. And that can be pretty rough, especially depending on how you felt about your time in service. And trying to recreate that for certain civilian employers might not necessarily happen. So it's more important to try and pick up, what were elements that you like about past jobs best? Did you like being able to bond with coworkers? Did you like being able to have a variety of new experiences? Did you like learning about different technical stuff, or gathering new skills, or working in a high demand environment? And use that to kind of help you navigate, where would I like to work and what kind of environment that I would like to work in. ultimately the question is, what would your dream job be? Now, we all have a whole variety of dream jobs. This is something we probably had more as kids than we definitely do as adults. But that can be serving as a guiding way for what you want to do, or, what career field or even degree field that you want to go into. So for me, I never had a specific dream job, but I always wanted to do something professionally that allowed me to help other people. So, that was a big ballpark for me. And a lot of my post-military life was me kind of refining that, navigating that of, okay, what does it look like? What do I feel like I would do best in that capacity? What do I feel like I could really work on and succeed in and thrive in? And that's how I would recommend other people kind of view it, of, not even necessarily what's feasible, because even when we think of a lot of the technical and industrial jobs nowadays that people may have referred back to of, get this job, it's more practical and you can get that, those same jobs are also being phased out on the same level of other jobs. It's not to say go and pursue, wild career aspirations, but if you want to, feel free to go completely for it. But you should pursue something that you're passionate about, rather than pursue something because you think it might be best for you financially and professionally. And then what training would you like to have? Some people may be completely bored with training, so let's not talk about training that's necessary. Like, we can understand that. But what training would you like to enjoy? There definitely is training and knowledge that's awesome to learn, that's awesome to be able to pick up, that's awesome to integrate in yourself as a person. I personally really, really loved my time in college. Didn't necessarily love my time in high school or any school before that, but I was interested in the training that I was doing and what I was learning. And I would happily be a forever student to be able to keep learning and developing that same knowledge, because I'm so invested in it and so interested in it. Just also happens to be that it's necessary for the field that I'm actually doing. So, try and distinguish that of like, what's something that if you were to train yourself on and to either better yourself as an individual or better yourself down along a career path, that's not necessary, but something that you'd be interested in, that you can enjoy, and that would be substantive and meaningful to you. Why have you previously chosen other fields of work? Sometimes it's a simple answer. Hey, I needed to work. This was what was best available for me, and that's why I jumped into it. Or, hey, I thought this was going to make me a lot of money, and this is why I went into it. I've met people who've spent their entire higher education career training for a particular job, years and years and years, and then getting into that particular field and then realizing they either didn't like the community that was in that field, they didn't like the work that was in that field, or they didn't like how they felt about it, and then just completely segued differently from what they had spent all that time training for, because they were more interested of like, okay, yeah, I could do this, I can make money and I can make a living, but I've got passions that are different outside of this, and those are the things that I want to pursue. So, that's the easy one of, if you previously chosen other fields of work, all right, I need to survive, I needed to do this, or maybe I thought this about myself, or I was interested in this once upon a time, and maybe I'm not, or maybe I still am interested in, but these were the opportunities that were available to me. We got to interrogate every little detail to kind of build up a pathway of where you're going. Hopefully that gave you some food for thought. Feel free to kind of dig into the modules. We have those on the side as well, so that way if you want to print those out, maybe grab a notepad or something, or hop on the keyboard and just kind of type down different thoughts, different ways to kind of interrogate your experience, and use that to get a better concept of appraising yourself and being able to use your strengths and your weaknesses in order to develop a foundation that can help you seek employment and seek you into a meaningful career path. I hope this presentation has been informative, and thank you for your attendance.